All right, folks. It has been a wonderful time. The chat has been cute, and the runs have been jaw-dropping. But all good things must come to an end, and I'm hungry. So, one last time, ladies and gentlemen, friends who are both, and wonderful, joyous people who are neither, thanks very much. You guys have a great marathon, and I am going to leave you in the capable hands of our next host, LM. You know what? You know what? I'm calling it there. Take it away from me, please.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here with us for Power Up with Pride 2023, benefiting the Trevor Project. I'm Ella Motos, and I will be hosting the next few games for you. I would like to say you can donate by using !donate in the chat, and check out the schedule using !schedule. We are running all weekend, and if you missed any runs in the marathon so far, you can find them uploaded after the marathon on our YouTube channel. And now we will be moving on. Thank you to all of your generous donations unlocking this bonus game. We've got Hollow Knight Godseeker % with Sawayoshi.
All right, are we ready to go? Okay, is this audio coming through to the main stream? If it is, hello. If not, hello anyways. All right. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sawayoshi, and welcome back to Power Up with Pride 2023. I'll be running Hollow Knight's Godseeker % category for you today. We came from Metroid Dread into Super Metroid, and we have another Metroidvania. Unfortunately, this category is neither Metroid nor Vania. We skip both those parts, and we just have a rush of 82 boss fights for you today. So Hollow Knight, of course, by Team Cherry, 2D Metroidvania. If you know the Metroidvania genre, you know Hollow Knight. And Godseeker % actually doesn't do any of the Metroid or Vania. Like I said, it starts a file on the Godseeker mode, which starts you in a DLC area, Godhome, and we fight through 5 pantheons, which are boss rushes, and we get to the ending of the mode as quickly as possible. It is an absolute blast, and oh boy, I'm nervous. And usually we run this game on Chinese because there's around 3 lines of text, I believe. We'll actually run this in English, just as a special marathon treat. Alright, so start a new file. Time starts on when I click Godseeker on the mode select menu, and we'll get started with that real quick here. Countdown from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Take it away, Math.
Hello everybody, I am here to provide comms. I am Cthulhu. So Sawa gave a pretty good introduction there to the category that is being run today. As they mentioned, there is none of the Metroidvania part of this game here, but we do get treated to every single boss fight in the game asterisk. So this is Godseeker %. There are 5 pantheons in the DLC Godhome area of the game. Sawa is going to be rushing through all of those, but to start things off, they need to put on all of their charms, and the first thing you'll notice here is Sawa is actually going to be over charming. If you don't know what that is something that that you can do at any point in the game, not just in this DLC area. you can actually equip additional charms up to basically 1 over what the normal limit would be, but you pay a small price for that. You take double damage. So Sawa's actually going to be doing all of these Pantheons, not just in a row, not just every single boss fight, but also taking double damage for about 95% of it. All but the final 7 bosses of the run will be done over charm. The full charm build is basically used to maximize the amount of damage. Now, Sawa's already in the first Pantheon here, screaming through these first few bosses. They go pretty quick. The average boss fight takes something like 20 seconds in this category. It is a little bit absurd, and you'll see a lot of these fights go very, very fast. I want to talk a little bit about the sources of damage that are being used. So if you're familiar with Hollow Knight, there are basically 2 ways to deal damage. You can attack with your sword there, called the Nail. That is a huge source of damage here. We have a fully upgraded Nail in this game file, just built to do these boss rushes. And are also using a charm called Unbreakable Strength, which increases our nail damage further by a factor of 1.5. But there's also spells, and you're going to see Sawa using a lot of them. In particular, they have equipped another charm called Fluke Nest. This charm replaces the normal Fireball spell with a cascade of these little creatures that we call flukes, that are called flukes in the game. They are, on the face of it, not all that strong, but actually there's a little bit of a bug that exists in the game where when an enemy gets hit by these flukes, the flukes actually look like they disappear, but still have a hitbox that lingers. And that causes some double to even triple hits on some bosses. So that's basically why it's useful for these boss rushes and bosses in general. You're going to see Sawa using it for, again, almost the entire stretch of this run until the final 7 bosses. So Sawa's actually already more than halfway through this first Pantheon. That was boss number 7 already killed. One thing you'll notice in a lot of these boss fights, there's basically an art to pushing enemies into flukes, or to basically shooting flukes where you think enemies will go. If an enemy's moving through a fluke hitbox, sometimes that can cause these multi-hits and deal a lot of additional damage. So a lot of these bosses have like rather specific strats for trying to basically make sure you get these flukes in where the boss will be and deal the most damage possible. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they won't. So there's a little bit of luck involved in some of them. In others, there are very specific setups to try to maximize the damage. So this is actually already the final boss of the first Pantheon, and this is actually the first Pantheon exclusive boss that we're seeing here. There's a number, if you played the base game but not the DLC, you may recognize most of these bosses. There's a handful that you won't, though, and this is the first of them. Mail Masters, Aura, and Mato. They are in the base game, but friendly there, and here they appear as a boss fight. It's a pretty fun boss fight, especially if you are used to them from the game, but haven't played the DLC yet. They appear as the final boss of Pantheon 1. Pantheons 2, 3, and 4 also feature Pantheon exclusive final bosses, and then there's a couple of additional ones in Pantheon 5 that I'll talk about when we get there. But there's Pantheon 1, so only a few minutes in, and Sawa's already done with the first Pantheon. The first Pantheon, of course, is the easiest, as you might expect. It features bosses from mostly the early game. The second Pantheon gets a little bit harder, featuring bosses that appear slightly later. And as you might expect, the third Pantheon is by far the hardest. Wait a second. No, sorry. The third Pantheon is the absolute worst. It has bosses that appear not quite toward the end of the game, but are actually very, very heavily RNG dependent. So you'll see a lot of fun times happening in Pantheon 3. Pantheon 4 does feature most of the bosses that deal double damage, and because Sawa's overcharmed, that actually means 4 damage here, because again, Sawa takes an additional double damage. So that's something fun to look forward to. But yeah, we get a handful of bosses. A lot of these bosses do become easier when you're using Fluke Nest. Other bosses like Soul Master can become very quick, or also basically be extremely rude to you and decide to never go to where you are trying to fluke. So you can see Sawa on some of these bosses is taking an approach that's not using the Fluke Nest and instead using Abyss Shriek. That's our next best spell, and you're going to see a lot of that. If you're familiar with, oh yeah, that's beautiful there. So that is a predictable pattern where in the second phase you get dives from Soul Master. So Sawa set it up with flukes where the dives were going to happen, and it worked beautifully. Yeah, this boss here is one that might be a bit notorious here in the Hollow Knight community. The Obwobbles are pretty tough. They seem to have pretty much a random spray of attacks of these little, I don't know, little spit bubbles that they shoot out. But actually, it is a consistent pattern, but it may as well be random. They can be pretty tough. Sawa made quick work of them. Onto the Mantis Lords. Mantis Lords, of course, one of the most iconic fights in the game. A little bit easier here with full equipment than they are when they first appear. But you saw there Sawa setting up a few different flukes as the bosses were about to come and attack. You'll see, again, a lot of that on a few different bosses. So yeah, just like that, we're halfway through Pantheon 2 as well. So these first 4 Pantheons each feature 10 total bosses. There's a slight caveat to that. It's actually possible to only get 9 bosses in Pantheon 3, but in Godseeker mode, you always get 10 bosses in the first 4 Pantheons. They are set, and the order is also set. The 5th Pantheon is actually a basically reprise of all of the first 40 bosses, and then an additional boss at the very end. So that is a 41 boss gauntlet. It takes quite a while. Sorry, actually 42. There's 2 additional bosses that get added in. So Pantheon 5 will be by far the longest part of this run. The first 4 Pantheons on their own each only take a few minutes with all of these strats. This right here is one of the more fun strats. Sawa showing it off very well there. You can alternate between pogos and side slashes. I didn't talk about one of the charms that Sawa is using, which is Steady Body. That charm actually stops all of the knockback that happens when you swing your nail. So it allows for some fun strats like that. Mostly it's useful in bosses like Broken Vessel there, where normally you'd be pushed back. And the boss would be pushed back, and it's hard to keep up damage. This way, Sawa was able to push them into the corner there and get that extra fluke damage. All right, and here's the final boss of Pantheon 2. Again, this is a Pantheon exclusive boss, like all the final bosses in the first few Pantheons, and this one is Paintmaster Shio. So you may start noticing a theme if you know a bit about Hollow Knight. The extra bosses that appear in these first few Pantheons are the Nail Masters. We had the Nail Masters Mato, and now we have Shio, who is the third of the Nail Master brothers. Shio has taken up a life of painting and is also the most iconic gay character in the game, so everybody loves Shio. But unfortunately decides to turn that painting into attacks in Pantheon 2. Actually a pretty fun boss fight, but Sawa makes it look quick and easy. All right, into Pantheon 3, everybody's least favorite Pantheon. So most of the bosses in here aren't necessarily the hardest bosses, but they do have a lot of RNG. So it can be a little bit frustrating depending on the patterns that you get. This next boss coming up is a good example of that. It's Elder Who. Elder Who has an attack where they can simply despawn for... Oh, here it is. Nice. I summoned it. Despawn for a few seconds and summon pancakes instead. We really don't want a lot of that. Ideally, you don't get any of those attacks, but you can simply lose time for as long as Elder Who deems necessary. And of course, because this is a marathon, we are seeing at least 3 attacks there. Wonderful.
Gotta love the pancakes.
Gotta love the pancakes. Good old Elder Who. Always delivering. All right, Sala's gonna go for something here. Got it, nice. Okay, so that right there was an intentional bit of damage in order to skip a boss screen. This one here on the collector is very, very tight. You only have a small window in order to make that, but you get a ton of additional damage because what that allows you to do is get extra hits in during what would be the introductory scream to the boss. So Saul was able to kill the collector basically immediately because of that. There's a few other bosses where we're going to see some of that coming up later in Pantheon 4 especially. Yeah, it's something that if you see a damage tank, most of the time it's intentional, right, Sawa?
Yep, most of the time.
All right, here is Grim. Grim is another iconic boss in this game. Unfortunately, in the Pantheons, again, it is possible to make pretty quick work of Grim, although when you're overcharmed... Nice, okay. So Sawa got good damage in there. When you're overcharmed, it's dangerous because you can accidentally... Basically, you want to stand underneath Grim and get a bunch of Abyss Shrieks in there, as you saw Sawa doing. If you get in the wrong position, you get hit, and obviously when you're taking double damage, that can be very dangerous. But luckily there, Sawa didn't get hit too much and was able to make quick work of Grim. All right, that actually marks the halfway point of Pantheon 3 as well. As you can see, Sawa moving very quickly through these. The second half of Pantheon 3 is no less frustrating than the first half. It features such bosses as Great Prince Zote and Umu and Sly. It's a fantastic time. So GPZ here is the one boss that's actually technically possible to miss in the Pantheons. If you let Zote die in your casual playthrough, Zote will not appear in this Pantheon. In fact, if you don't fight Great Prince Zote in the overworld, Zote will not appear in this Pantheon. So it is possible to simply not have a 10th boss for Pantheon 3. But on the Godseeker file, Zote always appears, and in most Hollow Knight speedrunning categories that do these Pantheons, it is also required to fight Zote and fight Zote in these Pantheons. There are a couple of exceptions. For example, God Home Ending, I believe, does not require Zote, and it is obviously faster to skip the additional boss. All right, here is Umu. Umu is one of everybody's least favorite bosses. Much like Elder Hu, this boss can simply decide that you lose time, but actually Sawa getting an excellent pattern there. So this boss is invulnerable during this phase, and the way to make Umu vulnerable again... Oh, that was very unfortunate damage there. The way to make Umu vulnerable again is to hit Umu with one of these exploding jellies, like you saw Sawa do there. The jellies don't have to spawn in right away, though. They could spawn in as late as the third attack instead of the first, and simply lose you something like 15 seconds. So luckily Sawa got good RNG from Umu to make up for some of what happened with Elder Hu earlier. Next here is Hornet 2. Hornet 2 is a scary boss when you fight her in the main game, but in the Pantheon, she's actually made of paper. They did not up her health at all, I believe, or if they did, it was very little for the Pantheons, which makes her actually a bit of a pushover. Hornet 1 has more HP in Pantheons than Hornet 2 does, which makes very, very little sense, to me at least. All right, and here is the final boss of Pantheon 3, and if you've been paying attention, once again, this is a unique boss, a Pantheon exclusive boss, and this is actually the Nail Sage, the leader of the Nail Masters. Sawa's going for a setup here, standing in the corner, and is going to fluke into the corner, waiting for Sly to come over, and then pushing Sly into this fluke's beautiful. For a very quick kill in that second phase. So that's where some of the power of the flukes comes in. And that's it for Pantheon 3. Pretty nicely done. All right, I've been talking a while. We do have a bit of a space for donations here, if it's a quick one.
Ooh, I'm just flabbergasted. I don't have any donations lined up, but I do want to mention 2 games from now, there is a bid war on which character to pick for Costume Quest. So get your bids in for that if you would like to select it.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, get those bids in. All right, this is the fourth Pantheon, and what at first glance might appear to be the final of the Pantheons. As we'll see very quickly, it is actually not. This Pantheon involves a lot of bosses that deal double damage normally. Again, because Sawa is overcharmed, they are actually going to be taking 4 damage for each hit from any of those bosses. The first boss fought there, Enraged Guardian, is one such boss. Luckily, Lostkin here is not. And once again, you'll notice Sawa going for generally trying to get Lostkin into a corner and then push them into a bunch of flukes that are shot in that corner. But Lostkin was being a bit of a bully there, not cooperating as much as we'd like. Next up is No Eyes, again luckily only normally a 1 damage boss, meaning Sawa will be taking 2 damage here. This boss is almost uniquely bad with flukes. No Eyes has a chance to teleport on every single hit, and the way flukes work, you fire something like 12 flukes, I'm not sure the exact number, with each cast, which basically makes it certain that if you hit No Eyes, they will not stay there. So instead Sawa fought with nice quick trade word there. Instead, Sawa fought with mostly nail damage there and made quick work of No Eyes. Trader Lord was a double damage boss, very terrifying, but Sawa makes it through. All right, this here, ooh, that is unfortunate. This is White Defender. White Defender is another boss that you want to do a scream skip on, and that's what Sawa was going for there. Again, it's very, very tight, so Sawa missed it by just a little bit, and actually was in the worst of both worlds where they got frozen, but then White Defender did not end up hitting them at the scream, instead it hit them after the scream. So yeah, this is a little bit scary, but White Defender is very, very close to dead. This is a tricky boss, especially when you're overcharmed. Oh no, okay, that is unfortunate, but White Defender can be a bit of a challenging boss, again, especially after some of the other bosses. Luckily in Pantheon 4, this means that Sawa only has to restart the 4th Pantheon, which is again only about that was the 5th boss, so not too long of a time loss there, given how fast the bosses go. So it can be a bit tricky. That is one thing about the Pantheons in this game. If you take a death in the Pantheon, then you actually have to restart the entire thing. It's pretty rough it's not so bad for the first 4 Pantheons where you have only 10 bosses total, but for the 5th Pantheon, it can be a little bit frustrating. All right, Sawa making quick work of Lostkin there on the second fight there, and coming back up to No Eyes. So No Eyes, again, because of this chance of teleporting, can be one of the more frustrating bosses to fight, but actually behaving pretty well here for Sawa. So Elder who didn't get the memo that we needed good RNG. All right, Sawa in much better shape going into Trader Lord here. Trader Lord, again, is a boss that you actually do also want to scream skip, as Sawa got there, and dies actually pretty quickly. Trader Lord also has very little HP total. All right, so much better shape than the end of Trader Lord last time, and hopefully we'll be able to show off the scream skip here. So there's a particular setup. Oh, now when it's just slightly too early and got the same situation. So you can see just how tight those scream skips really can be. Those scream skips save quite a bit of time. The amount of damage you can get in those few seconds of the boss scream is pretty massive. But obviously they can be a little bit frustrating. They're very hard to do. You have to hit them in very, very tight windows. And also they depend on your loads, which can be frustrating in some cases. For Trader Lord and White Defender, there are visual and audio cues that you can use that are non-load dependent, but for Collector, that is not the case. Nicely done there, getting through White Defender this time. So as you can see, in the midpoint of each of these Pantheons, you do also get a rest. You get a room where you have a bench and also a hot spring. The bench doesn't work like the benches in the rest of the game do, where you also basically save your progress and respawn there when you die. Instead, these benches only offer the heal. So they basically give you a full heal. The hot spring allows you to get full soul as well. So even if you die to a boss after a bench in the Pantheon, you do not respawn at the bench, you respawn outside the Pantheon, which is unfortunate. All right, a few more of these bosses here in Pantheon 4. Once again, some of the harder bosses here, and also these bosses that are dealing double damage. So Failed Champ, which was just killed, dealt double damage. You wouldn't know it because Sawa didn't get hit. Markoth there, also Sawa making pretty quick work of. We'll be seeing a lot of these bosses again. They appear in Pantheon 5 as well. So Sawa will be able to get revenge at that point. Watcher Knights here are a good case of where flukes can be powerful. Depending on the patterns that Sawa gets, you may see some cases where they shoot a fluke or a set of flukes, and then a bit later, after the flukes are seemingly gone, the boss dies, and that is a good showcase of what happens with the Fluke Nest charm and why it's useful in these pantheons. I should point out that the reason that Sawa is overcharmed is because they are using Fluke Nest. There's not that much to gain from overcharming without using Fluke Nest, but Fluke Nest actually takes 3 charm notches normally, and that is hard to fit into a build that is otherwise going to still be powerful enough to save a lot of time with. So typically, if you're using Fluke Nest in Pantheons, you are likely going to be overcharming in order to do it. And obviously that adds in quite a bit of additional danger, especially for the end of Pantheon 4 here. Soul Tyrant is, again, a boss that you can use flukes for, but is not the best use case. So Soul Tyrant can teleport around a lot, doesn't always behave. If you get lucky with where you put your flukes and you've positioned them well, Soul Tyrant can basically die immediately, which is obviously nice. But you can see Sawa opted there to do a non-fluke fight. And then Pure Vessel here coming up is the final boss of Pantheon 4. Again, an exclusive boss, but breaking this male master trend. Instead, Pure Vessel is actually a beefed up version of the final boss of Hollow Knight, which is the Hollow Knight. Pure Vessel has a bit of a unique property in that flukes are very, very bad against them, even though they basically stay put. As far as I'm aware, they don't affect, or maybe they just don't double on Pure Vessel. But once again, we're going to see mostly just other spells like Shriek and also the occasional Descending Dark, and a lot of nail damage here. Pure Vessel is a boss that deals double damage, kind of terrifying when you first fight them. Sawa making absolutely quick work of them there. Nicely done. All right, so that is the first 4 Pantheons. Sawa doing a dream gate there. I'm not sure if that does anything, but just showing off a bit, I guess. So you might think you're done after you get 4 Pantheons done, but actually you're not. This will open up, and when you hit that orb there, it actually basically opens a path to an additional challenge, which is probably the most infamous challenge in all of Hollow Knight. It is the Pantheon of Hallow Nest, or Pantheon 5 as we tend to call it. Once again, this Pantheon is literally every boss in a row. So it's 42 bosses long. It involves beefed up versions of some of the bosses that you may be familiar with. And it also involves tricky arenas. So you can see it right away here. Vengefly King becomes double VK, and Sawa making very quick work there. Very nicely done. So this is the first twist that they throw at you. But the second, you can look at the arena here. The bottom of the arena has been partially replaced with spikes. So now you're fighting on these 3 small platforms instead of fighting on solid ground. It obviously becomes just a bit more dangerous when you're doing that. So it's definitely a bit tricky. Some of the bosses remain unchanged. False Knight is one such example. Generally, the way that the 5th Pantheon works, if you are familiar with the Godhelm DLC but haven't seen Pantheon 5, the way it works is they the bosses have their ascended arenas, but they have the same health and damage as their attuned versions, and I'm referring to their levels in the Hall of Gods there. So there's a practice area in Godhome called the Hall of Gods. You can fight each boss. They come with 3 levels: attuned, ascended, and radiant. Radiant meaning they will one-shot you. In Pantheon 5, you get the ascended arena, but the same health and damage of the attuned or lowest level version, which is a bit of a saving grace in some cases. I'm thinking of Markov in particular, who we'll be seeing quite a bit later in this Pantheon. But yeah, if you've been paying attention, you'll recognize pretty much all of these bosses. As I mentioned, you're just going through those first 40 or so bosses from the first 4 Pantheons. Slight change in the order, so we can talk a little bit about that as we get there, but mostly it's the arenas that change. So you'll notice Gorb here, for example. Once again, we're fighting on 3 platforms, so showing off that you can actually pogo the clouds, which I actually did not know. Thank you, Sawa, for showing that off. But for the most part, these bosses are the same bosses as we saw in Pantheon 1. One thing that has changed in Pantheon 5, very, very unfortunate. Okay, I am thoroughly confused as to whatever was happening there, but Sawa made it work. Went for the Scream Skip, didn't quite get it, but then still didn't get damaged. Very nicely done. Yeah, the one thing that changes is the location and the impact of the hot springs. So, like I said, every midpoint of the Pantheons gave you a rest, gave you a bench and a hot spring. In Pantheon 5, it happens generally every 5 bosses. So instead of the midpoint, it's however long it takes for 5 bosses. That is not true for the first 5. So you have to fight all 10 bosses from Pantheon 1 in a row without a break. And that can be pretty tricky, especially ending with Oromonto. All right, very nice recovery there from Sawa. Back to the Nail Brothers here. Once again, same strats pretty much for these first bosses. There will come a point in Pantheon 5 where Sawa is going to actually un-overcharm, and it will be for the final 7 bosses. So at the penultimate rest stop, Sawa will take off Fluke Nest and replace it with Dream Wielder. This is to serve 2 purposes. One is that flukes are not particularly good for those 7 bosses, and the other is that, I'm holding my breath here, nicely done, Sawa, giving us all a scare. The other is that obviously when you're overcharmed, it can be scary to get through all of those bosses. Those are some of the hardest in the game, especially in the order they appear and with the arenas that they have. The other impact of having these rest stops every 5 bosses means that you sometimes get soul for what would be a Pantheon start boss like 0. So this fight goes a bit faster in Pantheon 5 than it went in Pantheon 2, but we are solidly into the Pantheon 2 section of this final Pantheon here. So once again, if Sawa does take a death somewhere in here, they will have to restart from the beginning. So they're going to be doing their best to stay alive, as they have done. Once again, still overcharmed, so still taking double damage compared to what they should be taking, which can be obviously very, very terrifying when you're fighting some of these bosses. Let's see if we can see these fluke strats again. So the setup here, the first dive, Soulmaster is actually invincible in the second phase rather, but the second dive they can take damage again. So Sawa, you can see there, set it up where they don't attack on the first dive, then they basically bait Soulmaster into going into the corner there and shooting a couple of flukes. They multi-hit and Soulmaster dies. So nicely shown off there. All right, once again we have Oblobbles, and Oblobbles, once again, pretty terrifying boss. This is a bit of a bullet hell boss, and it's tricky if you are not too familiar with them. Even if you are familiar with them, the second phase here, where they get a bit faster, is hard to deal with, especially when you're taking double damage. They're one of the hardest bosses to be hitless, and it is not much better in the speed run. All right, and here we have the Mantis Lords, the absolutely unchanged and unchanging Mantis Lords, the regular fight that we've all come to know and love. I'm sure once we finish this first attack, this first Mantis here, we'll get the other two just like we... Oh, no, this is the Sisters of Battle, and this is probably one of the more infamous fights of the Pantheons. So this is actually the Mantis Lords fight in the best kind of reprise possible. We have all three Mantises attacking simultaneously. As you can imagine, this can be very tricky. It is one of the unique Pantheon 5 bosses. There's a couple of these, as I mentioned early in the run. Sawa going down to 1 HP just to show they can. Absolutely perfect.
Ooh, this was the fight that made me give up on Godhome.
Yeah, that fight can be real hard when you first get to it, but it's so fun once you get used to it. All right, and here's the actual hardest fight in the game. It is Marmu. Marmu is impossible, and you cannot convince me otherwise. It's only through cheating that's how we'll pass that fight. All right, so the second half of these P2 bosses are mostly unchanged from how they appear in Pantheon 2. There is a couple of slight differences, though. The Pantheon 5 boss order actually changes things around a little bit compared to how they appear in the first 4 Pantheons. In particular, Galeon is moved, I believe, into this section, or into a later section. I forget where Galeon appears originally. But I think we get Galeon here. Yeah, so Galeon appears a bit early. All of this is basically a sneaky way of setting up a little trio of bosses later in Pantheon 5 that I'll talk about when it happens. It's actually quite nice and thematic. And I think they did well. What I don't understand is why they didn't just have them in that order to begin with, but you know what? It's all good. All right, here's Paintmaster Shio. Again, gay icon. We love him. Shio is honestly a pretty fun boss fight. If you haven't played the Godhome DLC, but you enjoyed the base game of Hollow Knight, I definitely would recommend that you try it. Maybe not Pantheon 5 if fighting 42 bosses in a row is not your thing. But the first 4 Pantheons are a lot more manageable, and the boss fights are really unique. They're very enjoyable. All right, going on to the P3 portion of the Pantheon Holodest, aka all the bosses that we fought in Pantheon 3. Once again, this section here of 5 bosses has, I believe, literally no change from the corresponding section of 5 bosses in Pantheon 3. I'm not sure that that's true of any other 5 boss section in Pantheon 5. Don't quote me on that, or do. I don't really mind. But maybe we'll get some better RNG with Elder Who here. Nope. Okay, yeah, I don't know why I said anything. I'm sorry, Sawa.
It's an entire commentator's curse.
Yeah. The second the words "maybe we'll get better RNG" left my lips, Elder Who
instantly 2 pancakes.
Yeah. You know, I brought this upon you. I'm sorry. All right, once again, we have Collector, not quite getting the Scream Skip there. Again, very tight window for the Scream Skips. The Collector Scream Skip in particular is load dependent, which is sometimes frustrating because if your loads are not consistent, it can be hard. But yeah, Sawa's still going to show how to get through this fight. Collector is another boss where it's a bit of a unique situation. Nail is generally the best way to fight Collector. You kind of want to save soul coming into this next bit, mostly because both God Tamer and also the Grim fight you want a lot of soul for. So you don't want to waste too much fighting Collector with spells. And you can get a lot of good nail swings in. But Collector is a bit of a unique case in that Collector actually doesn't give you soul back when you hit them. Nice quick fight with God Tamer there, and we're back to Grim. So lovers of Grim or the Grim DLC in Hollow Knight may have noticed that we fought Grim in the first 4 Pantheons, but we missed out on the fancier fight of the Nightmare King Grim. Nightmare King Grim does appear in this Pantheon, so just you wait. It is a good time. That is the one additional boss that aside from the final boss, doesn't appear in the first 4 pantheons. Nice quick grim there, though. All right, now the back half of Pantheon 3 is quite changed from this corresponding section of P5. So boldly skipping the bench there and showing that you can pogo that acid as well. We love to see it. So for some reason, a lot of these random textures in the Pantheons are pogoable. Don't know why, could not tell you, but just enjoy it. So Watcher Knights, you may remember, actually appeared in Pantheon 4, not in Pantheon 3 at all. This is the start of what will be a pretty nice little theme. So we get Watcher Knights. If you are familiar with the base game, you may remember that Watcher Knights are the boss that guards Lurien, one of the 3 dreamers in the game, which are necessary to beat the game normally. So Watcher Knights are the first of these, the first of these sort of dreamer guarding bosses. The other boss that might come to mind is Umu, who guards Monomon, another of the dreamers, and Umu is actually the next boss that we fight here. So they're setting you up here for something that's a little bit fun. If you are familiar with Hollow Knight, again, the 3rd dreamer is Hera, who appears in Deep Nest, but Hera does not have a boss that is guarding her, actually. So we'll see what they do for Hera in just a minute here. Unfortunate on that upswing there. Umu being a little bit rude with some of these patterns. Sawa getting out of there. Those explosions from the jellies actually deal double damage normally, which means they are dealing 4 damage to Sawa, which is a bit frustrating. This is probably the hardest bit of of Pantheon 5, honestly. Okay, so this might look a little bit strange to you. It looked like we were going to get Hornet, but actually we're getting what the game calls Nosk. This is a bit strange. This is a boss called Wing Nosk, or sometimes called Nosket by the community. It is Nosk if Nosk pretended to be Hornet instead of us. This is basically the stand-in for Hera, or the boss guarding Hera. Nosk obviously appears in Deep Nest, and Hera is obviously the mother of Hornet. So they do a nice little job of tying it all together. But of course, now after Hornet, who should we fight? Well, in Pantheon 3 after Hornet, we fought the Great Nail-Edged Sly. So this must be the 30th boss that we're fighting here. The end of the Pantheon 3 section. Good old Sly. We should have no concerns, because once we're done with Sly, we'll get a nice bench, a nice rest, and be able to heal and get a lot of soul and all those good things. We're going to see Sawa go ahead and use the same strat that they used earlier of trying to shoot a bunch of flukes into the corner and then push Sly into them. Beautifully done. And you may notice Sawa's actually gonna heal up here, because the game actually tricks you once again. We didn't actually fight Hornet earlier. We fought Nosk, and Hornet still needs to be fought. So Hornet appears instead of before Sly, after Sly, but also sort of before Sly. So it's a bit of a bait and switch. If you played Pantheon 5 without seeing it before, you might have fallen for this and thought that you would get a nice little heal after Sly, and simply not. But nicely done there. Like I said, that is one of the harder parts of Pantheon 5. With this particular loadout, where Sawa is going to be overcharmed for the first part, but not for the ending, I would say it is the hardest part of Pantheon 5. So nicely done. Sawa hoping for good RNG, Lostkin refusing to give it. That's okay. Still nicely played, able to push Lostkin into the corner there. Once again, we're hoping for multi-hits with flukes. We're hoping for basically pushing Lostkin around. Lostkin is not cooperating very much, kind of jumping around in the middle, which is where you can't really get a lot of flukes off, but still taken care of pretty quickly. All right, so once again, we're going to get No Eyes. Now, No Eyes, you may notice, is looking a little thornier this time. This arena has been changed and becomes one of the harder arenas in the game, except No Eyes just behaving very well and just standing there. So you'll notice Sawa does at times go for these flukes. The flukes mostly just cause No Eyes to teleport, because when you hit No Eyes with anything, there's a chance that she teleports, and it's relatively high. I think something like 25%. Nice scream skip on Trader Lord there. So hitting with flukes basically forces a teleport. Sometimes there's no good way to really reach No Eyes quickly, so you may as well use a fluke and then hope that she teleports somewhere better. All right, very quick Trader Lord there, and we're back to White Defender as the final boss before Sawa will un-overcharm. Don't forget it, Sawa. A gets the scream skip. Nicely done. So this White Defender fight should go a bit faster than the previous one because of that scream skip. A little bit rude of a scream there. White Defender actually has two screams, the initial scream and the mid-fight scream. The mid-fight scream precedes this stage, where White Defender just keeps jumping out of the ground. Yeah, nicely done. All right, un-overcharm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Already got it.
Okay, cool. So now we're into the final 7 bosses of this run. So there's a handful of pretty tough bosses. So Tyrant, again, the order is a little bit different than it was in P4. So Tyrant was the penultimate boss in P4, the boss right before Pure Vessel, but appears first after the bench here. And this is the boss leading into what most people consider the hardest combination of bosses in Pantheon 5. So after this will be Markov, who doesn't sound that hard. If you fought Markov even in Pantheons, you probably think of Markov as not that difficult of a boss, maybe a little bit annoying, but not impossible. The arena that they give Markov in Pantheon 5 makes the fight one of the more notorious. Many a Pantheon 5 run has been lost to Markov in the casual sense. The trick when you're a speedrunner is that Markov is actually somewhat made of paper. Markov can die very quickly if you're dealing a ton of damage. If you don't mind damage tanking a little bit, like Sawa showing off there, then you can get through Markov very quickly. So nicely done here. But this arena is definitely tough. All right, so here is Grey Prince Zote. In my opinion, one of the best bosses in the game, nay, the best boss in the game, with a fantastic soundtrack, which you cannot hear here in Godhome. But GPZ is definitely a bit of a tricky fight, one that takes some getting used to. Again, if you didn't kill, or if you killed Zote in your casual, so you let Zote die, didn't kill Avenge Viking, then Zote will not appear here, which makes Pantheon 5 significantly easier. So if you don't mind the somewhat disappointing experience of not having all 42 bosses here in Pantheon 5, and you are struggling to complete it, feel free to try it on a file that didn't save Zote, and you might have an easier time with it. All right, next up is Failed Champ. This is another double damage boss, so it can be a bit tricky. We're going to see Sawa take pretty quick care of Failed Champ, though. Yeah, nicely done there. Dream Wielder, I should mention, is what Sawa put on after taking off Fluke Nest. That is a pretty useful charm for a couple of reasons. One, it speeds up your Dream Nail, so it allows you to get a Dream Nail off quicker than you would otherwise. But 2, it also doubles the soul that you get from that Dream Nail. So instead of a single cast of a spell or a single heal, you get 2 from a single Dream Nail, which is very, very nice. All right, and here is the Nightmare King Grim that I was promising earlier. This fight is obviously one of the most iconic in Hollow Knight. If you haven't played the game, play it, first of all. If you have played the game, go fight NKG. This fight is very, very hard. NKG deals double damage. Sawa is trying to do basically what was done to Grim earlier, stand underneath and get a few of these shrieks off. And it is possible to kill NKG very, very quickly with those kinds of strats. Unfortunately, NKG just slightly too much. That's unfortunate. Slightly too much health there. Probably going to die after this third balloon here. But it's a great fight casually. The speedrun makes it look easy. Trust me, it's not. It's a hard fight. It'll take you a while to beat, but it's fantastic. Very good fight. All right, and this is the last of the benches. Coming up next are the final 2 bosses in in Hollow Knight, really, in the Pantheon of Hallownest. So first we have Pure Vessel. We've seen Pure Vessel before. This is once again the beefed up version of the Hollow Knight, the typical final boss of the game for the any percent ending, or the typical first ending. There is another boss that will appear after, though, and it is notoriously the hardest boss in the game by most counts. So Sawa pretty much going to be working with the same strats as they did in Pantheon 4. Pure Vessel has not really changed. Beautiful parry there to avoid the damage. Pure Vessel does deal double damage, which is obviously still scary, even though they're not overcharmed. In Pantheon 4, Sawa would have been taking 4 damage. Now they're only taking 2, and makes pretty quick work of Pure Vessel there. Nicely done. All right, but now we get to the real final boss. So if you're familiar with the base game, you may know that the Hollow Knight is not the real end of things. No, if you dream nail the Hollow Knight at the end of the fight, you actually get access into their mind and into the Radiance fight. So here in the Pantheon of Hallownest, to cap off this 42 boss rush, is a beefed up version of Radiance called Absolute Radiance. Radiance already deals double damage in the base game. Absolute Radiance does not up that to 4 times, thank goodness. Still only deals double, but does have a much faster attack pattern, and also adds in a bunch of additional attacks. So you'll notice the swords are coming out faster, significantly faster than normal Radiance. There's also there's also extra orbs. There's all sorts of fun things. So it's very tricky. It is one of the hardest fights, if not the hardest in the game. I think most people would consider it the hardest fight. And we're not quite done yet. So that was the first 2 phases of Abzrad, but we have this climb phase. In the base game, the regular Radiance fight ends with this climb phase. You come up and hit Radiance once. Not only is the climb phase harder here, but there's this final phase, which Sawa makes extremely quick work of and gets the kill. Nicely done.
GG's.
Time is coming up on the Fade to Black. And that is time.
Nicely done. Still sub 50. GG's.
Yeah.
Yeah, big congratulations. That is really stunning.
Yeah, it's certainly a run. It's difficult. You saw me. I did take a death in P4, but hey, what can you do about it? It's still well under estimate. I'm entirely happy with this run. It's a good showing for an event, if not the most terrifying thing to run in an event as well. Yeah. Math, if you have anything to say?
Just yeah, if you liked the look of that, if you don't know Hollow Knight, first of all, it's a great game. It's a good speed game, but the boss fights are definitely a huge draw. Check out the God Home DLC if you haven't already. If you like the look of that and don't know Hollow Knight, check it out. It's a great game, and obviously get your donations in here for a great cause to the Trevor Project. Absolutely.
A couple closing words from me to end off this run. Again, thank you to Power Up with Pride for hosting this run. Please donate to the Trevor Project. They do amazing work for what they do, and also trans rights. If you want to catch more of my runs, I stream on Twitch, sawayoshi YT. Every once in a while, Hollow Knight, other games, and you'll see one of those other games actually on Sunday. I'll be running Lone Fungus, so keep an eye out for that. I think that's about it, though. Yeah, thanks for having us.
We appreciate the work. That was such a great run. While Sawa was putting on that great show, we did get a donation from Uno Squid, who donated $15 and says, Big Moth reminds you to drink your orange juice. I'm not sure about that advice, but we'll take it into consideration. Power Up with Pride has partnered with the Yeti to bring you shirts based on various runs throughout the event. These awesome designs will only be around as long as the marathon is, so make sure you pick them up now. $5 from each shirt sale goes directly to the Trevor Project. Visit theyeti.com to check them all out. You can see them there on screen. Really great shirts. They're all pretty great, I will say. I haven't decided which one I'm going to buy myself yet, but I'm definitely going to get one. You also see on screen upcoming Bid Wars. 2 games from now, we've got Costume Quest by Von Yvonne, and you can select which character is used for that run. Currently, Ren is in the lead with $51. Power Up with Pride is raising money for the Trevor Project, which is the leading national organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth. You can check them out at www.thetrevorproject.org to access their services, find out more about their impact, or to donate directly.